Hi, Marko. Thanks for
Hi.
making time for this conversation for the change agent, murrosagentti. So the sound is good for you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to adjust the camera somehow nice.
Okay, take your time.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so Hannele Tito is the organizer, coordinator of the murrosagentti network initiative, and you know her since a long time, from what I understand.
Yes.
I know your work with the social forums here in Finland and in Tampere. But before we are getting into your actions related to social justice and sustainability, etc., would you like to share how it started for you and where your motivation comes from?
Well, since high school, I have been interested in sort of improving the world, as we say in Finnish, maailmanparannus, and then especially global solidarity, ecological sustainability have been sort of core of my interest. And then I got involved in various initiatives, first in Järvenpää, where I was living during the high school time, and then in Tampere, where I came to study at the university in '89.
What did you study?
Sociology, and then peace research, environmental policy.
Okay, and so you became an activist since a very young age.
Yes, from high school on, I could say.
Okay. And so what was your call? Because there are so many things to do in that field, so many things to change.
And yes, well, I found this team or an organization also called Coalition for Environment and Development, ympäristö ja kehitys. So those two sort of combined also what I felt was important. So with this organization, then we initiated a good number of campaigns and had contacts all around the world.
Okay. And so today, what is your focus on?
Well, I think it's the same. So basically trying to phase out overproduction and overconsumption, because for many there's too much. The environmental impact is just unacceptable, and then there are at the same time people who have too little to live dignified lives. So some kind of leveling off with the ecological sustainability in the forefront is the kind of leitmotif of my activities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so you are part of different organizations, right?
Yes, so I identify strongly with the degrowth movement, or kohtuusliike in Finnish, and then I'm active with the Siemenpuu Foundation that supports environmental action in developing countries, and then this social forum process is something I'm committed to, sort of locally and globally.
Okay. As a foreigner and so a little bit observer of the Finnish society, it's very surprising for me to see that how Finland or part of Finland embraced the American way of life with a big SUV and going to the supermarket. This is very surprising to me. Because it seems that Finns do have a strong connection with nature through simple, mucky life. And there could be a middle way, right, with great technology development, etc., but not surrendering, if I may, to the American way of life. How was it after the Second War here in Finland? How did it happen that there is this domination of this American model?
Well, I think it's a maybe age-old human trait to look sort of upwards and emulate, or sort of admire and emulate those sort of livelihoods and lifestyles. So at some point, but basically that has to do also with this nice ideas of equality and democracy, that sort of everyone has the right to be like the rich, because in the older days the ordinary people would not dream of becoming elite, because there was the feudal organization of the society, and these were birthrights, so the aristocracy lived aristocratic lives, and the others didn't probably even dream of it because they were not born aristocrats. But now with the spirit of equality, then so everybody has the right and opportunity in a way to become the world's richest, like is happening in the US, from ordinary family backgrounds, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and those types. So this is what's happening. Everybody looks up on those elites, and then has this fantasy of becoming like them, and then it works out in all very small scale. So the cultural hegemony of sort of modern luxuries is really strong, and that's playing out in all societies wherever there are some indigenous peoples or let's say working class identities, that they are being undermined. And this universal dream is to look at the richest, and the US happens to be the sort of reference point because of the media and entertainment industry that spread out the images globally. But this is just something, unless we deal with this, it's very difficult to deal with climate or biodiversity. Like if it's a universal dream to become over-consumer and over-producer, then of course climate will and biodiversity will have a havoc.
Right. So it means that, but is there a conflict with the values that are very specific to the Finns? Well, they are specific to many people, were specific to many people. For example, the respect for nature. The country is way less damaged than so many others, for example, when it comes to the environment. So how do you think that it would be possible for the country to kind of change these dominant imperialistic values of materialism being the things that you want, and shift to something else? Do you see that this is possible? Because it seems to me that the Finns are coming from a space where it could be possible, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, yes, I think, of course, I mean, like any other sort of indigenous peoples who have been modernizing only recently, there are those connections, cultural and spiritual, that could help resist I would say, the colonial power of this modern overproduction, overconsumption. And I think this decolonization is a good way to approach it. And if we look at the political decolonization, there were at least like two streams. One by Gandhi, which was emphasized the non-violent approach, and to be decolonized, it's not enough to be liberated. It's not enough to throw out the rulers, to throw out the British. But to change the whole society so that even the rulers change. So I think he had decided that even the Britons will be better off if they don't colonize India. But then in North Africa, for example, Frantz Fanon theorized that it has to be violently done, so that this sort of liberation takes strong enough an impact. And then, of course, we saw a lot of violent or armed struggles for liberation from colonialism. But I'm in favor of the Gandhian approach, and therefore the insistence of truth, that if we all looked at the things truthfully, speak truthfully, then the change can happen. And that's why I've been a bit active recently with the ecocide movement, that we should, make this destroying of environment crime, because now people can fly to space and they are admired for it. But if we were truthful, then we would say that this is wrong, it's morally wrong, and it should be also in the criminal setting, or it should be made illegal. So any acts, any extravagant acts that are not justified for any well-being, but cause environmental harm, then of course those should be forbidden. So this is the big cultural shift, which I think could come from this insistence of truth, satyagraha, that we would stop emulating the environmentally disastrous livelihoods and lifestyles.
Okay. And is the society receptive to those ideas?
Well, not at the moment. And there's something, I think, fundamentally wrong in the modern civilization, because this is clearly self-destructive. The way societies work, fueled by fossil energy and transforming natural ecosystems into monocultures, that of course this cannot provide long-term livelihood, sustainable well-being for all. And though we have science, and the science is communicating this, it has no impact. That we are driven by some very subconscious emotional motives, where this becoming a bit richer, consuming a bit more, is the leading principle how societies work. And of course this has to do with power, that this suits very well that this is how capitalism works, that if it provides profit for the capital, that it's done. And the sort of equity and sustainability concerns are secondary.
Right. And do you see that there is a new wave with the new generation coming in Finland? Do you see a lot of concern and energy and actions in that sense?
Well, there's a wave of concern and activities, like the Fridays for Future and the Extinction Rebellion and so on. But I think there's still a lot of homework to be done, so that the root causes of the present situation are understood, and the alternatives are built on systemic level, not just on energy sources or climate targets or so on. I would say that the problem is capitalist modernity, that there's something wrong with the modern mindset, because we have not seen any destruction in this level in pre-modern times. And specifically, if modernity is organized in capitalist principles, that means that the ultimate power is with the capital, and everything that is done should benefit capital. Then these kind of really undesirable things are happening in all scales.
Okay, and how do you find your balance between your understanding of the situation, the ideas you have, or with the group you're working with, and the fact that the change is slow? So how do you keep your motivation and your good energy?
Yeah, well, maybe I look at things in terms of flow of life, and that life is very old in this planet, like maybe 3 billion years old, and I don't think think that's threatened, and life will continue on this planet, even if human or if this capitalist modernity will make many species extinct, and also humans are very resilient. That in pre-modern times we saw humans living in ice and living in deserts, and so I'm not worried about the future of humans either. But of course, the kind of modern civilization that we have or we are part of, then that maybe will fall. But in a way, that's cycle of life anyhow. I mean, things are born and then they live and then they die, and this has happened in all civilizations. I mean, it's many civilizations before. So I think if our youth, for example, would more look at the situation in this term, I think there would be much less anxiety that planet is not at stake, humanity is not at stake. It's just the modern capitalist civilization that will probably crumble and take along lots of species along. But also that's been part of history of life on Earth, that species are born and then they live and then they go, like the dinosaur. So that's not alien to life on this planet as well. So we should not worry about things that are much beyond our scope, like planet or life in planet or human future on the planet. But we should focus on creating a society where people and other species can live good lives, and that's good enough fight and big enough fight to be meaningful for action and sort of calling of a life as well.
For sure. And I'd like to come back to the satyagraha, so the search for truth. This concept is also very connected to the Swaraj, so the local governments. And this is very also specific to the Indian culture and also other cultures of other countries. We had that in Europe, obviously, when we had big villages and small cities, etc. So how now that we are living in an age here in Europe where it's very centralized, where the countryside is getting more and more empty, and we have more and more suburb and all this, so it's very centralized model. How do you think that this word of satyagraha or search for truth resonates in the modern setting here in Europe?
Yeah, clearly not. That this interdependency or dependency is in growing all the time, and self-reliance is becoming less and less. And of course, so this one direction where we advocate as a degrowth movement, that the more self-reliant we are, then the less we are part of the problem, and then I think also more importantly, then the freer we are to think and work out the alternatives. So if people, for example, are dependent on Google and Facebook, then how can they think of future where these kind of big corporations are not manipulating behavior of billions of people, or if we are relying on food, that dependence on use of fossil fuel, like 80% of the food does. So then again, how can we imagine and work out a future where food is produced without the use of fossil energy? So I think therefore this self-reliance needs to be a key goal, but at the moment the trend is the reverse.
Do you feel we are really in a transition time, or not even yet in a transition?
No, I think things continue as before. So in a way, in a trajectory to hit the wall. So that the environmental talk is everywhere. Climate neutrality is goal of and like who doesn't agree with the goal of climate neutrality, but when it comes to really make the choices that do we leave the fossil fuels on the ground and then probably face reduction of the slowing down of the economy and then some more hard work somewhere, then choices to carry on as before, that we things are not happening in the scale and in the direction that is needed, that people so far are happy with the greenwash and not with the real green transition.
When it comes to social forum, would you like to remind how the social forum started and what they were for?
Well, it was a concept by Brazilians and some Europeans, I would say, that after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet bloc, then the capitalist modernity really got sort of upper hand, and then there was the felt need that we have to come together to work out our politics and our alternatives, and fortunately the freedom of speech and freedom of participation in elections had been there. For example, the Latin American dictatorships had to give away for free elections. So then this building of a new left forces started end of 90s, early 00s, and the World Social Forum was an important element of that. And I still think it has very important role, a big potential with the idea of open space, because I mean, when people start to organizing politically, then a lot of competition comes in, my ideas, my leadership, and so on. But then in the forum process, the idea is that there's no leaders, there's no common political statements, but there's this kind of space to interact, and then from that interaction create political campaigns or organizations. But then we had then left hegemony in Latin America for a while, Lula and others, but then again, because they chose to be part of capitalist world system, they could go all the fossil modernity, so they could only reach somewhere but not very far, and then got discredited along the way. So again, I think what we need is this really go into the root causes, address the root problems, create resistance, create alternatives from clearly deeper analysis of what is usual nowadays, and then make the change.
Right. So the first forum was Porto Alegre, was it?
Yes, 2001. And then in Finland, we started organizing them probably a year later in 2002. Mm-hmm. And in Tampere, we had very vibrant forums. I don't remember exactly the years, but maybe from 2004, 5, for at least 5 years. It was very, very active in combination with this mahdollisuuksien tori, market of opportunities.
Yes. Okay. And so there is, for example, this movement La Via Campesina, which are like, as you know, farmers of the world, like resisting to the industrialization and to keep the ownership of their land and of the seeds and the control of their production. So is it so that the social forum is kind of maybe not uniting, but is a space for all these movements to express themselves, and from the discussion, a politic, a direction is created? Is it how it works?
Yes. So I think, for example, in India, there was this rightist Hindu government, and then the World Social Forum took place in Mumbai, and then elections after that the more progressive parties won and then formed government for 10 years. So these kind of things happened in the beginning, but then of course, I mean, the social forum was one of the manifestations of that kind of spirit and the willingness for change. But then I think the 2008 financial crisis made it more clear that this kind of wishful thinking that we can have all, we have economic progress and we can have social progress and ecological sustainability, that it became clear that this formula that will not work. I mean, the so-called sustainable development fantasy, that only two of these can be done in the same go, and then the capitalist sort of forces organized themselves better. And then what we have seen is this more like authoritarian capitalism now in so many places. We have Erdogan in Turkey and Bolsonaro in Brazil, and we had Trump in the US, and so in a way we didn't we had not been able to build enough force in these like OOs, so that after the financial crisis our alternative would have been dominant one, but it was more the rightist forces that gained the upper hand. And so yes, so I think we need the forum more than ever, but that's not sort of widely shared idea. And so what is instead we see is more sort of single topic campaigns, like focusing on climate or something. And I don't think those will take us very far.
And do you think that the alternatives are visible enough? Because we have all the solutions possible to regenerate the soil, produce like kindly and surely, and feed people, and like, I mean, so many solutions are already existing and are not implemented, not funded, not supported. So do you think they are visible enough in Finland for people to see that alternative doesn't mean this is something crappy in a yurt somewhere in the woods, but this is something very valuable that it can be extremely motivating and generating a stability?
Yes, I also think it's not difficult. Like, for example, climate, just two things we need to do: leave the fossil fuels under the ground and let the vegetation grow back, and then the climate chaos can be avoided. But what makes it difficult then is the sort of power structures that so many people and institutions that are now in power rely on, we can say are addicted to fossil energy, that without their dose of fossil energy they cannot carry on as before. And so this is the challenge to let go. So if an institution falls without fossil energy, let it fall. Or if our daily routines don't work out, but during this COVID, we, for example, saw that flying is not necessary. We can well live without flying. So this kind of spirit should be there, that yes, we can live without fossil fuels. Life will be different, but it will not be worse unless the transition becomes violent, that the elites who are really addicted to fossil fuels just can't give it up and take up arms against the rest. Then it's nasty.
Okay. And I assume you have met thousands of super interesting people during your journey from everywhere. Is there someone who inspired you? I'm sure there are many, but maybe you can name one or two. And what was inspiring for you?
Yeah, well, I remember, like, for example, Vahukara from Kenya. She was a feminist left leader who are, for example, articulated that if you look at the chances of African women to live, they're very minimal, but they just refuse to die, and we have that against all odds, people do live good lives and take part in the struggles. And in India, Medha Patkar and the struggle against big dams and rights of the landless and rights of the city poor are very sort of inspiring personalities. Yes.
Okay, because they are very persistent and strong people, or because of what was inspiring?
Well, I mean that they understand the structures that are at play, so that they address the structural change and the commitment to the poorest, and then working with the poorest, organizing with them. So I think that is the approach, that if more activists would take these two more seriously, to look at the structures and address the demand changes in the big structures, and then look at from the angle of the poorest, then things would be much more clear. Like now, if we say that, oh, these cars using fossil fuels are a problem, then for the poorest, they don't have cars. It's not an issue, to live without a car. But then, because we look at it from the middle class, upper class perspective, then we say we need electric cars, which then have a different set of ecological problems. So that's why looking at these things more from the angle of the global average, which means in our terms poor people, or even then poorest of the poor, then this kind of sort of false solutions would emerge much less.
Yes, yeah. Would you have an advice or something to say to a young activist starting today and willing to embrace this, to change the world?
Yeah. Well, I would say that step back, look at the things longer into history, deeper into structures, and then don't aim at achieving change, because that's also a problem, that we're so keen to see something happening, so we make our goals very small, because small things we can imagine changing, but we should think big. And even if this kind of big change doesn't happen in our lifetime, it's okay. We have worked for it, and maybe it happens in the next generation. But then, so this would be my advice: think deeper, think bigger, and don't worry about the results.
Okay. Okay, very good. That's a very good advice, even though for old activists to remember.
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot. It was great sharing with you and getting a little bit to understand how you see things.
Yes,
Thank
thanks.
you very much. Bye-bye.